Hello.
Oh, hello.
On camera. There we go.
Hello.
Hi there.
Howdy.
And let me share the notes. Yeah, hello everyone. As I mentioned on the on Slack, unfortunately I can only be here for about 20-25 minutes today. But I'm happy to facilitate until then. And if you have anything that you'd like to discuss, please feel free to add it to the agenda. And feel free to add yourself into the participant list as well. All right. Let's get started then. So first item on the agenda is about links.
Yeah, I added that based off of what we talked about last week, Andrea. Yeah, so give a little context. So I've been, thinking about links for a while now and kind of like wondering, like various different use cases. And in talking with Andrea, it looked like one of the things that was kind of missing was knowing some of these use cases. So I went ahead and kind of started thinking about some, and the biggest use case for links that will be useful for us at least is so if you had an overarching system that requires knowledge of like how things are related, like related based off of like events, like, that have like semantic meaning, the links is actually a very powerful tool. So if you have like a maybe like a front end or some sort of like graph looking graph front end, this would absolutely be useful in being able to represent those correlations and relationships. So one of the things that so I think that's really important, being able to give people the ability to make their own front ends. Like for instance, like AWS, right? They have their own console. It would be nice if they were able to use CDE events, to show like causal relationships between like the different services very easily. So so I went back to the GitHub issue to kind of like see, what was talked about and what was thought about. And one thing that I think that's kind of missing is kind of like a global identifier to kind of to be able to, for the front end to make a query to say, hey, I want all events for this specific identifier, rather than trying to back propagate or backtrace to find all these relationships. I think overarching global IDs is absolutely needed for I guess being able to get that information to that system, to this overarching system. So that's kind of like where I kind of started and kind of like where I ended up. So I wanted to kind of get your guys' thoughts. Especially I know a few of you have been kind of back and forth on that links discussion. So I just wanted to kind of get everyone's thoughts behind it, what their vision for it is, and kind of go ahead and potentially add to it, right?
Thanks, Ben. So about the global identifier, so what we have today is an ID field in the context. I mean, the requirement that we have for this ID field is that it should be unique within the source of the event, as it's hard to require for an ID to be globally unique, but at least the combination source plus ID is meant to be globally unique. So it's not a single field, but the combination of the source that we have in the context plus the ID is a globally unique identifier of a certain ID. So that we have today in the spec. I don't know if perfect. That helps. What you can do today in terms of correlating events is using the subject. So let's say if you have events about certain artifact and that the artifact has an artifact ID, then you can, from a front end, you could look up all the events related to a certain artifact.
But that's huge, right? Like that's really expensive.
Yeah, so that's of course, and is not as a tight correlation as you could get from direct links, and that's I think why we considered having the link feature. So I think the reason we kind of postponed, at least from my perspective, the work on that, but definitely not excluded, is that providing these links puts kind of a stronger requirements in terms of adopting CDEvents from a platform, because the platform needs to have knowledge about this IDs, and might have access to like a global database where these IDs are stored to be able to reference to them properly and so forth. So it kind of puts like additional requirement of like implementing CDEvents. So what we discussed back in the CDEvents community summit was that we would introduce links, but as an optional feature of the protocol, so that if someone wanted to have links in their events, they could do it, and they could do it across the board. So for all type of events, of course, but not put it as a mandatory feature of the protocol. So I think that was what we discussed in the CDEvent community summit. But yeah, I think I've talked enough, so I'll let everyone else speak.
Oh, and just real quick, this ID, since we're already on this page, if I have two separate CDEvents, or say CDEvents service A calls service, or sends a CDEvent to essentially service B, is this ID gonna be the same, or are they gonna be different?
The ID uniquely identifies one event. So if a service sends an event and then sends another event, the ID will be different. So you can never reuse the same ID twice. Okay,
so yeah, that's where I think the difference is when I say global ID, I mean like a global ID of the starting event gets propagated all throughout, to all the other events essentially. So when you receive event, N, N+1, you have this global identifier, and whatever system is, ingesting that, like this overarching front end system, they'll be able to easily tie and look up information based off that ID, rather than trying to figure out like how everything is connected, right? So that's the one suggestion that I think that's absolutely needed for links, or maybe in the spec. I don't know.
sounds, it doesn't really sound like links then. I mean, that's not references between events. It's more of a common context ID. Maybe we shouldn't misuse the term context, but I would rather call that a, well, context ID, but we already said that we already defined that term here. So it's a common ID across all events. There are a number of issues with that, I would say, or at least a few. I mean, then that means that each producer of these events needs to be aware of that specific context, which is might be a problem in itself. Then that context needs to be propagated in the system which sends all these events to each of the event to the same ID. And another one is that if you would like to reference a very old event sent long time ago, how could you know that?
I think you're starting to mix your metaphors. Yeah, you're starting to make, because it doesn't remove the fact that you're going to have the original ID for the event. So if you wanted to reference an old event and you were aware of that event, you'd still be able to do that. I think what he's talking about is more of a, we need to tie a bunch of events together to represent a complete system or an end-to-end pipeline flow. And you can build the graph through links. Yes, we're not disputing that. But if you have hundreds of graphs that you need to build, then having that global reference will, minimize the amount of computing power you need to do that. No,
I wouldn't say so. I mean, if you have a graph database, if you have links between these different events, it's very simple query to just get all the referenced links from the reference event.
Yeah, but if you need to grab 100 of those reference or 1,000 of those reference links at once, then you still do have to, even in your graph database, contextually go back and get all of these together at once. The challenge here is, how do you represent the inner working of a massive system of CI/CD workflows, so that it's being able to use it at an enterprise scale where you need to tie all those systems together. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, and we are solving that. I mean, we are handling exactly that problem in Ericsson with these links between the different events. So there are direct links between each of the events then. And that's, I mean, that works great in that area. It would not work to have one single context ID for all events, because you cannot know. I mean, you might want to group the events in different ways depending on what consumer you are. So you can't say, when you're producing something, you can't say, for any coming consumer of this information, how would it want to group these events? What context is relevant when grouping these events? It depends.
Yeah. I think that's fair. You can group them however, but I think the main use case of like how people are going to group things is the starting event is usually going to be the thing that how it's going to propagate. And that's what most people are concerned with, right? Is how do we associate, the starting event to this end event, right? And you do that with, well, you can easily do that with, I think, a unique, a global identifier.
Yeah, but there's not just one starting event and one finish event. Of course, you probably have, say, one source code event, probably saying if you push a pull request to GitHub, then that is in some way a start event for your flow. But that could eventually trigger thousands of different artifacts being built. So then all those artifacts should have the same global ID. And then some of those artifacts will get sources from other places as well. And how could those sources know what start event will be used for other flows, let's say, if you can follow my line of thought there. So
well, that would be a different flow, right? Because if you just said that this would be building those thousands of artifacts based on that original commit. So if something else, there was another commit that started another build of 1,000 new artifacts, even snapshots, that would be another event. You're not going to have two events that have the building of one same artifact, right?
How can they relate to each other? I mean, one artifact will be built of multiple sources probably, and all those sources will then have different IDs. So then that artifact,
no, they wouldn't have different IDs because it's the event. This is not the source ID that we're talking about. This is the event ID of the event that starts the build process. Yeah,
which is probably much related to the source itself, the source change itself, right? the commit.
Right, but it's only that one source change. It's still one source change that's going to trigger.
Okay,
build.
but it will include other sources as well. So it will
Of course,
need to
it'll
reference
include
also
others.
other sources.
Right, but it's still a part of that single build process, even in those different sources that were never touched, right?
Yeah. We could of course include an optional context ID for the source, for the process that started at a certain point. Sure.
Yeah, and I think
but
that's
we
what
also
we're.
need to track it the other way around, from let's say downstream to upstream, and maybe to reference that way as well.
Right, but it doesn't remove the ability to do that. Having that global context for this initial end-to-end build doesn't remove your ability to use the other IDs that are already in the spec. This is only an introduction of a way to do something global and do a global tracking of an event that propagates throughout an entire system, right? We're not saying remove anything. We're saying add a way to say, hey, we want to call this the beginning of this series of events, and then easily track all the events that went through that series. And that also lets me do things like I can have one system trigger multiple systems. I can have one CI/CD process, like you're saying, build an artifact, but what if those artifacts are coming from, different business entities?
Exactly.
And I still want to know that they were triggered by, entity X, but that also had Y and Z do builds as well to be deployed in some team's environment, someplace else completely different, right? And it just gives me the entire context of, especially from a costing perspective, right? I can now say, okay, this entire event costs this much whenever this person does a commit for this project, because I can see all of the systems impacted. I can see that quickly, and I can analyze that when I give it to my data engineers.
This might be an example of a situation where you need an annotated envelope, where you're passing this event around, and each process that is touching it is references, and then if you need to interpret the whole context, you need to actually go through and reference all of the annotations to see where it's been and what's happened to it.
Yeah, whether we should pass the whole event or not, or just an ID, that's maybe remains to be seen. But sure, we could include an optional context ID to ease the life for the consumers. That's how I would see the main benefit of that, to make it easier as a consumer to group the data.
Yeah.
I mean, if we would still have links between all events, each individual event, we would still solve the same use case, but we would make life a bit easier, maybe, if the database or whatever storing all these events have a good property lookup feature where you can look up for a certain ID instead of traverse a link tree.
Exactly. And it's really for the analysis side of it, right? And the visualization side of it. Because if I wanted to also carry that, context between different platforms and be able to see what's going on in another platform, it'll be a lot easier for like a UI team to look for the single ID than to have to go to each system, figure out if, that event was there, looking at the links, and it's easier for them to logically group what they're doing in their mind as they're creating these visualizations. Sorry, guys.
And I've been trying. Oh, sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
I was just going to add a little bit here as well. That this goal ID isn't necessarily part of links, like what you suggested, Emil. Like the links was like a necessity for a front-end system to make sense of links, essentially, without needing to back propagate. So I just wanted to make that clear, because you did make the distinction that they are two very different things.
So you asked me if I think one of them is mandatory or what was the question, man? Sorry.
Oh, it wasn't a question. I was just making sure that, we agree that links is a different thing than this global ID. Because I noticed that Andrea is writing like a lot of this, but it's all under links, but it is a different things, but it is I would say it's needed to make sense of links is kind of like how I was going about it.
Then I would just as a reference, there is something called, I think it's called context in the, or CTX in the Captain event protocol, which is more or less, I think, what you're describing, that all the events sent within a Captain context will have the same context ID on them, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And we've discussed that long time back, if we should have the same in CDEvents, but we didn't at that time, at least, include it for now. But then, of course, we have also the possibility to add custom data to all events, and it's possible to add this ID as a producer of the event. Now, if you have a certain group of consumers of the events that would like to have this ID, then it's perfectly fine to add it there.
And I think it's really important. So like tracing has solved a lot of like these issues with like IDs and whatnot. And I think we could really benefit from like getting inspiration from like how they solve these problems. Because, you know, if tracing didn't have this global ID, they could absolutely do back propagation, right? Or, you know, back tracing. But why do they not do that? Because it's inefficient, right? So so that's why they have this global identifier to make things easy. So
but they can still just trace it within a certain span. So if there are relations between these span, they have a very hard time, I guess, to sort out those relations, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's different spans, but you still have a parent ID, right? Like there's still this global identifier somewhere, right? Whether that's, and it's usually like in the actual trace ID itself, right? The first like n number of bytes is actually the start of the event, if you will, and you know, spans just kind of like add to it. So yeah, but you know, like I said, that's kind of different. You know, like we're kind of, you know, going off in the weeds here, but I just want to say, you know, like when we're looking at, you know, potentially solving this problem, since tracing has already done this, it might be a good idea to get inspiration there.
Sure. Well, I wouldn't say that they have solved the whole problem there, but there is that's one way to deal with grouping events on the consumer side, to have a generic span ID. Sure. That's one way of doing it. I don't think that solves all issues that we want to solve with this traceability use case here, but maybe we should have a separate issue for that. If we should call it a span ID to not conflict it with the context term we use for the
I mean,
relate these issues, but I would say that they have benefits, both of them, and they might solve different use cases.
Yeah, definitely. And if you want, I can go ahead and create that issue. Because I agree 100%, Emil, it is different, and I think it should be tracked separately. So so we can definitely get some good discussion out of that issue as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been trying to take some notes, but I'm not very good at notes. Sorry about that.
No,
I mean, I started on the links, but it's clear that, I mean, they're like kind of different topics. So that, I mean, I think it's quite clear that we have links and we have the global context or span. I mean, we can decide on the name. I think for the context span, there would be some like behavior and kind of conformance as well that we would need to identify. Because if that's a feature that you need to rely on, then we would need to have a system and say, okay, this system supports CDEvents, or this system supports CDEvents with context, because, you know, it's different if you can rely on the context ID being propagated or not being propagated, right? So if it's something that is there, if it's something that you want to use, you need to be able to rely on it. But on the same time, we don't necessarily want to make it like a mandatory feature of the protocol. So I guess we maybe need to define different profiles, but okay. So I would say let's start with an issue. And if you have actually a proposal, if you want to work on a proposal, then maybe, you know, highlight make a use case and show how this could look in the protocol, in the spec, and how it would solve certain problem by any means. Yeah, you're welcome to do so. I mean, if you want to go beyond the issue, I mean, and then we can discuss on the actual proposal. That certainly would help in, like, you know, making progress on this faster as we.
You know, I'll see, like, you know, what time allows me to do. But and then, you know, and then aside from like this global identifier being needed, you know, this also I think kind of highlights the importance of links also being needed as well. You know, like I said, that overarching system needs links to make, you know, to make those relationships. Because like I said, like it seemed like when I was talking with you, Andre, I might have gotten the wrong feeling, but it sounded like it was kind of up in the air whether or not links was still a viable option. So I just wanted to make it clear it is a good use case for us.
Right. Yeah. I would need to think a bit, you know, what are the specific different use cases that you can solve with context and links. So that's something that we can try to flesh out in the issues as well.
Okay.
But yeah, I think they're both they both look like interesting options. As I said, I feel like they put like a stronger set of requirement on the implementing platform, but they also for sure give a much richer set of features. So, you know, it's so I think they're definitely both interesting, but especially if you're going to adopt one or the other or both, I think we need to make sure that it's clear which of the feature achieves which specific use case, and why do we need both, or, you know, so that we give a clear message to adopters that want to implement these, you know, what to use which field for what. But
yeah, definitely.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for bringing this up. Ben.
Yeah, thanks for the
really
discussion.
Useful. All right. Yeah, unfortunately, I need to drop from the meeting for today. But there are a few more things on the agenda. If you would like to continue the discussion. So basically, the first item that I had in there is like versioning. I mean, we've been discussing this offline a bit. So I think we probably reached an agreement on a way forward. So I don't know if we want to discuss this further on the meeting. And then updates on the Java, on the various SDKs. I don't know if there are any updates on the GitHub action. And then finally, I had an item about 0.2 planning, at least what I'm planning to work on the short term. Yeah, I'm really sorry. Unfortunately, I have to leave. I don't know. Emil, would you be happy to continue from here? Facilitating?
Sure. I can continue sharing, sure.
Thanks a lot. Well, great to see everyone. I'll stop sharing so that.
Yeah, thank you. Talk to you later, Andrea. Thank you.
Good one, Andrea.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So let me take over sharing. There we go. So let's just try to conclude the discussion there on what are the next steps for this discussion on context IDs versus links or use cases and suggestions. I think all of these are more or less under this subtopic, right? Subtopic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll do like this instead. Changing Andreas notes now. So let's do like this. Something like this, maybe.
Oh yeah, like that.
So I don't know if we should call them context IDs or span IDs, but whatever. If you would be happy, Bernd, to write an issue about this, or I mean, the current issue we have on links is quite long already, and it kind of focuses on the actual
links itself.
inter-event linking.
Yeah.
If we would now instead have a more global span ID discussed, we could maybe have it as a separate issue, but of course they are very much related. I still understand that. So
Yeah. Like I said, that'll be a follow-up for me, is to create a separate issue.
should I call it span IDs then?
Yeah, I think span IDs is a good name.
Good. Any more comments on this topic before we move on then? Okay, good. Great discussions, I think. Good to see the involvement here. So spec versioning, I know that Andrea wanted to bring this up. He has been working quite heavily on a pull request in this area. Of course, we could discuss it, but I don't know, maybe we should instead keep that discussion within the pull request itself. There is a lot of information here that Andrea has written. And if you're interested in how we provide the version field and so on in the events themselves, please involve yourselves in this issue and the related pull request.
When we say spec versioning, are we talking about the version of the event, like what the event looks like, or are we talking about the versioning? I'm guessing it's the artifacts, right? Because I see artifact packaged event. Is it the version that's in the artifact?
No, it's on the schemas. So we have schemas for each of the event types, and each of the event types, they have individual event type versions in their schema. So if we add a new field or remove something, we set the version of that event type schema.
Okay, cool.
Then we also have a spec version, which is the overall version for all event types in the CDEvents protocol. So there we do releases. We recently released the 0.1 version of the spec, which contains a lot of different sub versions then for each event type. So what we're discussing here is where should the spec version be defined in the event itself, where should it be seen, and where should the event version itself be defined or be used within the event. So in this, for example, there is a schema ID or a reference there to where we can see the artifact packaged event, and this then uses a URL on the CDEvents.dev site, which has a spec version. So this is for the overall spec, and within that spec there is each of the event types are there, and if you retrieve this URL, you will get this certain individual event schema for this artifact packaged event. So it's not about the versions of the artifacts or anything like that within the artifact published or created events or packaged events. Sorry, rather about the schemas themselves. But I think if there are no real concerns there or things we would like to discuss openly in the group, we can more or less just have it in the issue and pull request itself. I don't know, Eric, you're not here anymore. Okay, you were here before, so I know Eric was a bit involved as well in the issue there and pull request. So okay, I move on then. So the Java SDK, Yolanda, you're here, right? Have you been working on this in any way, and what is the status then, if so?
Yeah, so this one we initially planned for version 0.1, but with some other priorities comes in, like we couldn't start with the Java SDK update with the latest specification. Yeah, but definitely we actually we started now, like comparing with the old spec to the new spec and starting updated as per the latest specification. So this work is going on, so that we have started. It'll take like a week or more. So we'll be raising a PR for this change. And also we have a plan to update the CDEvents POC as well. So that currently is taking an old specification event types, so that we wanted to update with the latest specification for Go and Java SDK. So that is currently being used with the CDEvents POC. So yeah, so that's what we have plan about Java SDK.
What to use?
What is the POC in this case? Is this like, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Ben. So initially we have a proof of concept to show like initially it's taken between two components, the tecton and captain. So it just shows like how the events goes from one component to another component in the CI/CD flow. One builds an artifact and another approves. Yeah, so this is the flow. Actually, it goes in the POC. So different components involved to have this proof to show like how exactly the CDEvents works. So this is initially developed because that is why it uses the old specification that we have. But after that, like so many discussions and things like that, so we have identified like something. The specification is different now, so that needs to be updated for this as well as the Java SDK that is developed. Implemented earlier. So all that will be changed as per the new specification is what we are planning.
Okay.
So this was created under the old CDEvents.
Okay, that's what I was just gonna ask. I was like, okay, that link is different. So are we planning on moving once we update this to the, okay, cool. Because I was like, this is a really useful graph. So I'd really be able to like to reference that. So that's awesome.
I don't believe we have created any POC repository
Not yet, yeah.
But there will be. I guess we will more or less move whatever is in here in this subfolder, or move, but we will of course migrate it to the 0.1 version and at the same time move it to a new repository in the CDEvents organization.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if there was anything else Andrea wanted to know about this. Is there anyone else working on it? Is it you, Yalander?
So with me, Adam, he's working on from my team. So he started with the SDK updation. And together we'll be working on the POC once the SDK is done. So because we see Go SDK is already updated with the latest specification, so we can use as is in the POC. But yeah, so Java SDK will update so it can be consumed by other parties also, like here mentioned, right? So I think someone is also looking for the Java SDK, I guess.
Yeah, I think isn't there someone else that also is looking into this or not at the same time now? We have a ticket for the Java SDK. No, I thought we had a ticket for updating the Java SDK as well. Maybe that's in this repository then. It's still a bit
old. So we had one to create Java SDK, I remember in the old one, but
yeah, we're
not sure
maybe not for updating it then. Yeah.
I can create one if that doesn't exist in the latest repo. So
please do that.
There is one in the Java SDK repository. There is an issue for aligning with the latest spec.
In the Java SDK, which is
SDK
in this
repo.
Yeah.
There is an SDK Java already here. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Good. Thanks. And
yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah. There is. I believe this was okay. It's not discussed by anyone else, but there was some more person I think involved in this or shown interest in maybe helping out here as well. But can't remember now who it was. But if you make a comment, maybe get under here and saying that you intend to work on this.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Then you might get some help from someone else who is already looking into it as well. If there's some.
Yeah, sure.
Please note that there. Okay, going on then to the Python SDK.
Yes.
Eric, you're back. Yeah.
Yeah, I was never gone. I was just hiding behind the list of all other participants
Okay.
in this Zoom call. Yeah, so current status is pretty much the same as last time. I haven't had any time to improve it. But so there is a pull request up now where the SDK can currently be used to send events that are compliant with the spec. It's not sufficiently documented. There are some examples on how to do it, but there's quite a bit of work remaining there. What I'm planning for 0.1 is to switch to Pydantic for the data models, which would allow us to basically parse an incoming event as well, not just send events. But I have an open question. I must admit, this is not an area of Python that I've done that much work. Is Pydantic the correct choice here if I want to be able to both send and parse JSON events, or is there something else that is better that I don't know about? Pydantic is what Cloud Events seem to use, at least in their own code. But if anyone has better suggestions, I'm interested in those.
Would you get sorry, would you get any help from the Cloud Events implementation of using Pydantic there if you would reuse it? So
I'm not sure. It depends. If we want to send Cloud Events as like full JSON objects on a message bus, then I think I will get help from the Cloud Events Pydantic thing. If we send it as where the Cloud Event stuff is in HTTP headers and CDEvent is in a JSON payload, then I don't think I will get any help from Pydantic. But or not for the Cloud Events part, I will still get help for the CDEvents part with Pydantic. So I'm inclined to use it for that reason.
Okay. I don't have any alternative option there on top of my head. Anyone else who's a Python programmer?
I know a lot of major Python like SDKs use Pydantic, so I think it makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds good. Then I will go for that. It should be a very small change actually, because I'm already using Python data classes, and Pydantic data classes have exactly the same syntax as far as I can see. So I basically just need to switch out some decorators, and I should be fine. Yeah, so hopefully get that pretty much for free. But as I wrote there, it should be straightforward trademark. I'm sure something will go wrong when I try it. So yeah, we'll see. But then after that, some verification and documentation, and then making a release. I did have a question, which I added at the bottom there. Previously, the Go SDK had a CLI, so which made it really easy for like bash scripts and stuff to send CDEvents. Now I don't think it has that anymore. And I think we should pick one of the SDKs to have a CLI. I would probably go for the Go SDK because it tends to be first out the door every time. But yeah, basically a discussion what SDK should have a CLI connected to it.
So I think the SDK doesn't matter as much when discussing like a CLI. I think it's more of like distributing the CLI is like, so my concern is like, if whoever's going to maintain this, distributing and releasing Go binaries is a lot more difficult than just releasing Python. So that's like the only difference. And like I said, that work isn't too much more difficult, but that is the difference between like wanting to choose Go versus Python. But I think both SDKs are perfectly fine to choose. They're both suitable CLI languages. So it's more up to the maintainers. Do they want to, like potentially, bundle for Debian packages, for Linux, other Linux pack? Now you have to do this, for all these different platforms. You have to do this with Python as well, but that's really easy. All you need to do is like switch, the package. But with like Go, you might have to build this binary differently every single time, which is fine to be solved with scripts. But like I said, that's the difference there. So, and I have a long time experience with like Go, so I'm like all for Go. I love Go, but like I said, choose what I think is that makes sense for the maintainers, and that would probably be the one that I would go down. Yeah.
Basically, I can start an issue for this in some appropriate repository, so we can continue discussion. Because I agree with Ben, it should be a choice taken with some thought behind it, basically.
I think that issue could go into under the community repository unless there's a better fit for it.
No, I can put it there. That sounds good.
Where we could discuss new repositories and such. That would be best, I think. But yeah, I also agree that we should, at the moment, we should create a CLI where we think we can easiest achieve it right now. So we have something at least to use. And it doesn't really matter if we need to change that decision later on because of reasons, whatever.
No, exactly. The CLI is going to work the same regardless of what language the underlying SDK is written.
Yeah, I wouldn't be so sure that all the ways you handle properties or parameters to the CLI would be exactly the same, regardless, unless we have a strict specification of what the CLI should look like. But I don't think we need to dictate that either right now, do we? As long as it's possible to use it.
Yeah, that's fair. I should have said we could make the CLI work the same regardless of what language the SDK.
We could, and I'm not sure if that's yeah.
No, that might not be a priority. That's a good point.
Yeah. Good. So what should we say something here then? So no decision really needed, I think. Now let's go for what we have. And of course, if you have some rudimentary CLI when you implemented Python SDK, just provide it as some kind of beta thing there as well, if you like, within the SDK itself. That's, I think, perfectly fine. Okay, GitHub Actions. I know that Vibhav and what is his name now? Brad are working on that one, and they are not in this meeting as far as I can see, so I don't have any other updates there. I assume they are progressing a bit. The 0-2 planning is one of the last topics, and just upcoming events. We haven't set the roadmap or the content really of the 0-2 release. We have stated somewhat in an old version of the roadmap that we have provided that we intend to include certain features before end of this year. And I'm pretty sure all of those features are not in the 0.1 version. So if we should not update that roadmap or conflict with it, we need to have something more in place before Christmas. But again, of course, we can change that roadmap. No one is really dependent on it in that way. So there's no urgency to really release 0.2 before we have something valuable to put in it. So unless you have any good ideas, I haven't thought too much about this yet. I think we can just continue working on the issues we have and see when there is something valuable to release. We group it in the 0.2 release at that time. So I don't think we need to define that 0.2 scope too tightly yet.
One thing that might be nice is these individual bullet points for like fixed versioning schemas and the list below it is to put the GitHub issue next to it. You know, it'd be nice like if I could copy paste that and be like, oh, here's the roadmap, and people can just click those individual links.
You mean okay, because there are issues for it. Yeah. I can try to do that after the meeting too.
Okay, awesome. Thank
where
you.
where I find them. I guess I could find some of them at least. Yeah. I won't bore you with that now in the meeting. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, if I don't find it, I can ask Andrea to add it if he knows where it is.
Yeah.
Of course. Then just this is a shout out so that the CFP ends on, is it Friday this week? For KubeCon EU, if you're interested in proposing some presentation there. That's for information. Anything else you would like to bring up today then that we haven't put into the agenda? Claire, do you have anything on your mind regarding the website refresh?
I'm making progress on a revised landing page at the moment. I've got most of the content in place and I'm just going through and making it look pretty.
It's kind of related to the versioning discussion we had in the beginning as well there, a bit, or that we have in netping issues.
Yeah, so I've got a mechanism in that I think I can implement now, which will allow us to deal with that situation in the future.
Yeah, so the idea is that there should be a landing page which is more or less, now you need to correct me if I'm wrong there, but this landing page should be quite generic at the start of it, so the information here shouldn't be too tied to any specific spec version or spec release. But
I can share if you want to see where I am at the moment. Happy to.
Please do. Yeah, please do. I'll stop sharing so you can take over.
Hopefully you're seeing that now.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I'm doing basically is expanding this with a narrative to give us that early introduction. So when you land on this page, you'll get a quick pitch for why you should read this page, and then a narrative to introduce you into the specific challenges that we're addressing with CDEvents. And then this is giving you a very high level overview and then introducing you into further links to follow. So this is the for the audience that really doesn't know what this is about, this is the attempt to grab their attention and draw them into exploring more about the content. And I need to go through and tidy up the visual look and feel of this and make it a little bit more polished. But yeah, this is the overarching structure that I'm looking to put in place.
Do you have some drawing skills as well to provide some nice graphics or something here? So
yes, I'm working on that at the moment.
Good. Perfect. And then for the individual spec versions, I guess if you just, maybe that's not possible to click now there on the docs part, but we intend then to be able to publish.
Yeah, so that's just it's just config in the in the overarching setup, which I'll look at tomorrow.
So of course we reference the the GitHub repo for detailed descriptions of things, but still some of the high level, at least, event descriptions should be still on the website as well. Then version per different spec versions. Good. Thanks, Terry. Any more comments? or we could call it a day, I guess, at least in the Europe area. The day has ended more or less. I guess you in the US still need to work some more hours. Okay, that's it for today then. Thank you for your attention, and good to see you here.
Yeah, thanks
Talk to
everyone.
you next time. Bye-bye.